Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Shubh, and if you remember last episode, I spoke a little bit about going to the cinema and how much of an exciting experience that was for me. I went again in the last few days, but I had an even more enjoyable experience this time, partly because the cinema was empty. But more on that in a bit. That's what we're going to talk about first, the movie I watched in the cinema this week, and that is Dark Waters, Mark Ruffalo's passion project environmental thriller film. I'm very excited to talk about this because I feel like it's a movie that really needs to be watched. Up next, we'll talk about Little Women, which is a movie I regrettably had not seen until just recently. And, I might have to change some rankings on 2019. But it genuinely reaffirms my thinking that 2019 was the best cinematic year of the 2010s. Following that, we'll get back to what is now becoming a regularly scheduled segment, Shubh's Hot Take. This episode, we're going to talk about one of the hottest takes I have. Why I think Mamma Mia 2 is genuinely a good film. Stay tuned for that, because I have what I think is a very convincing argument. And finally, for our top 5, in honor of the 10th anniversary of one of my favorite movies of all time, Inception, we're going to be talking about my top 5 Christopher Nolan films. So let's get into it. So, the movie I watched in the cinemas this week, Dark Waters. Now, one of the reasons I had such a great experience has nothing to do with the movie whatsoever. One of the great joys in life for me is getting a ticket to be it a late night show or any show, especially now that the pandemic is keeping people away from the theaters as much as possible. And getting a show where there's virtually no one but you and the projectionist in the theater. It's incredible. The sound travels so much nicer when there's not as many bodies blocking the vibrations. You feel like you're genuinely immersed within the story on the screen. It's a feeling I don't know how to put into words. Which is, I guess, why I like film so much, because that's exactly what film is. It's putting feelings into things that aren't always words. But that's one thing Dark Waters does really well. So Dark Waters is directed by Todd Haynes, stars Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway. It tells the story of one Rob Bilott, who once is on the verge of making a partner at his firm and becoming a new father. But he hears and is sort of confronted in his office by a Parkersburg farmer, Wilbur Tennant, played by Bill Camp, in an exceptional role with eyebrows to die for. He talks about his dying cows and how his suspicions that a nearby chemical plant are the reason for his farm becoming a massive graveyard, essentially. Bilott he contends with these sort of dueling allegiances, one to his world of being a defense attorney for chemical companies, and one to the Parkersburg farmer, who is a family friend of his. Since his firm represents this like range of corporate clients, his decision to take on the company DuPont that owns the landfill next to the tenant farm, as well as the fact that his company and a lot of his colleagues are friendly with DuPont leadership and execs, it makes it tough for him. But this sort of duality is played with a lot, especially with Haynes' regular cinematographer Ed Lachman's sort of inky, dark, and green tingy palette. It creates this sci-fi type shadow aura, but it's also where and how Dark Waters becomes closer to injecting this with its real, intimate, and urgent concerns. When he arrives at the farm, sort of complemented by this green, dingy, sci-fi visual, Bilott understands the essence of his investigation. And from then on, we go into a story that uncovers the toxic chemicals and products that have infiltrated every aspect of the American life, as well as how Mark Ruffalo's character, Rob Bilott, deals with the dualities of balancing this passion for justice and his regular life. The film is based on a New York Times article called The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare. This film is essentially Mark Ruffalo's passion project. And his passion for the story and as well as environmental causes is pretty much what brought it onto screen. And he plays this brilliant, sort of unassuming hero that brings an intensity to Bilott, but focuses on the humility that he recognizes within the real-life character. Bilott is a corporate defense attorney that goes against the system that he used to defend, but this story has such a ubiquitous sort of reach because it's not only the corporate malfeasance that led to the poisoning of Americans through the chemicals that we consume on a daily basis, but the same thing is seen with things like opioids, fracking, climate change. This story is not just isolated in this moment. It goes way beyond. And it's a story of real-life heroes versus superheroes. You know, in an interview with Trevor Noah, Mark Ruffalo points out the difference between his character of the Hulk and Robert Bilott. He said the comic book characters are heroes that you want to be, but real life heroes are the ones you do anything not to be. It's the choices that real life heroes make that you hope you never have to, because they're the most difficult choices in reality. His story is one that hopes that the truth will make people do the right thing. And Rob Bilott is a real life figure that we should look up to as a hero that did the right thing and is still doing the right thing. You know, it says that in his past, he was an expert in the EPA's regulatory framework. He understands things like the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, and he mastered chemistry despite it being his worst subject in high school. He had this consummate insider knowledge that he used along with his thoroughness and sort of dedication to take on one of the world's largest and oldest companies. When the real Rob Bilott was asked about why he did it, he said that there was a reason why I was interested in helping out the tenants. It was a great opportunity to use my background for people who really needed it. One of the things not mentioned in the film, however, is the sizable, obvious corruption in the sort of real-life counterparts of what this movie discusses. For example, 3 of the lawyers used by DuPont in West Virginia were hired in leadership positions in the state's Department of Environmental Protection. And while the film does allude to things like this happening, there are so many more angles of this sort of corruption that are present that we need to look at beyond a cinematic experience. And that's one of the things that I believe is the strength of this film. The ending of this film is not a typical happy Hollywood ending. It's a barrage of facts that says the fight is still going on. One, because Rob Bellot is still fighting this fight, but also because it's not one person's fight to fight. This is the movie is a call to action for us all. One of the funny things, though, is that, I believe when the company DuPont sort of had a merger with Dow Chemicals, they swept off their chemical portfolio to a new company, a spin-off company called Chemours. And they've replaced PFOA, the chemical in discussion in this film, with a similar fluorine-based compound that's designed to biodegrade more quickly. This is an alternative that DuPont should have considered when they came up with the idea 20 years ago, but again, it's profit over people. But when Dark Waters was released on November 12, 2019, DuPont's stock price dropped even further by 7.15 points from $72.18 to $65.03. And even though the portfolio of chemicals is now part of Chemours, the public lawsuits that were alluded to in the film became a liability for Chemours. So they sued their ex-parent company, I suppose, alleging that they saddled them with liabilities that it failed to sort of project for in good faith. Another sort of agreement that DuPont breaks in reality. The film never overcomes this formulaic quality for this kind of investigative thriller. It goes through the same storytelling motions. The twists and turns come exactly where you need them. Every sort of triumph is met with the same and equal and opposite reaction in terms of deflation. But mostly it's the relationship between this frustrated but supportive wife character that Anne Hathaway plays. A lot of her story is burdened with sort of giving birth to two children who Rob and Sarah are both sort of concerned will develop DuPont-related chemical illnesses. But most of it, sort of, her character is just really announcing that she's not the wife in a man's story. But it's hard to say how this could have been changed, keeping true to the reality of the situation. The story is Rob Bellot's story, it's not Sarah's. But it would have been nice to see her sort of as a character that didn't always feel the need to complain about the lack of her role as her role. And, as it goes with any good sort of legal drama of this sort, there has to be a talented sort of group of characters that Bellot will test patiences of. Tim Robbins plays this frustrated and understanding boss. Anne Hathaway plays a frustrated but understanding wife. Bill Pullman is the showboating sort of suspender-wearing Virginia trial lawyer. And Bill Camp, again, is an incredible Appalachian accent-bearing farmer. But most of all, this film sort of just fits snugly into place with its genre. It takes everything that it knows from movies like Spotlight and The Insider and Erin Brockovich, All the President's Men, but doesn't really go beyond that. What did work, though, is the fact that this script and the film visually, it doesn't shy away from showing the hard work and necessary work heroes must go through to earn not only their closure, but what they're fighting for. It shows Rob sitting by himself on the floor of a storage room. It shows him going through so many boxes of evidence and rereading letters from DuPont. It makes reading comprehension at the SAT level look beautiful and cinematic and engaging. It nails every detail of this sort of genre convention and portrays skillfully the monolith capacity of American capitalism and how it can just drive through the lives of American people with reckless abandon. It's this 20-year-old drama that careens into our present and feels urgent because environmental issues like this are not going anywhere. Dark Waters, its most effective moment comes from the fact that it's not telling a story that has ended. It's telling a story that's about to begin. Right. With that, let's take a break. Up next is my dissection of Little Women, followed by why I think Mamma Mia 2 is incredible. And we'll close off with my top 5 Chris Nolan movies. Stay tuned.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
We just spoke about Dark Waters. What I forgot to mention, as it seems like I'm doing constantly now, is please do take the chance to watch Dark Waters. It talks about an issue that affects 99% of the human population, and I feel like it's important viewing and important information for almost all of us to know, because pretty much all of us are affected by it. But Little Women. Now, Little Women is one of maybe thousands and thousands of various media adaptations of the famous novel by Louisa May Alcott. This particular version was written and directed by Greta Gerwig, starring Saoirse Ronan, Florence Pugh, Emma Watson, Timothée Chalamet, Laura Dern, Meryl Streep, and so many, many more. A marvel in casting, truly. But the story follows 4 sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, in the years after the Civil War, where Jo lives in New York and makes her living as a writer and teacher. Her sister Amy studies painting in Paris with her Aunt March. One day Amy has a chance encounter with a childhood friend, Laurie, that Jo proposed to but was ultimately rejected by. And also follows the stories of their oldest sibling Meg, who is married to a school teacher, and the sickness of their youngest sister Beth, whose sort of ailments bring together the family that is separated. So my thoughts. This film, as I said in the intro, it was the nail in the coffin, if you will, for my belief that 2019 is probably not only one of the greatest cinematic years of my lifetime, but also probably the best year of the 2010s as a decade. It's a year made of movies like Jojo Rabbit, Parasite, at 1917, Knives Out, Joker, Glass, and even the Ryan Reynolds Six Underground. I thought it was pretty good. It's a Michael Bay movie. You can't expect much more from it. But, every single movie in that year sort of... No, okay, not every single movie, because Ad Astra came out that year. But these movies all have a certain quality to them that I don't think came in as much of a concentration as any year before. And luckily enough for us, It just happened to be the year right before the quarantine. So if you have not seen any of the movies nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, despite my thoughts that the Oscars are really just a sham, please watch them. But Little Women is the movie that I'm talking about right now. So what goes well? There's really one thing that separates this from not only the lot of the Little Women adaptations, but also the rest of this film. It's that it has a writer that is willing to truly engage with the text and throw their own authentic voice at it. It's one of those sort of true passion projects that you can feel the passion sort of beaming out of. And the best way to sort of describe that is that Greta Gerwig revolutionized this story. Now, one of the sort of criticisms of this film was that the film was confusing and the non-linear timeline didn't make sense. But this is not a typical adaptation of this film. In fact, it strays so far away from everything else that's done that it's the best version to sort of enter the cinematic and media universe of this text. You know, there's so many versions of this book, there's so many adaptations of it that they've even done an anime. They've done a mini-series. They've done multiple movies. And it's all from a book that's technically 2 volumes of a story that follows the same 4 characters. Part 1 is the happy teenage days, and part 2 is the tough story. And most of the adaptations tend to focus on part 1, the conflict-free happy days. But this story, at its core, is the coming-of-age tale of how 4 women learn the sacrifices and joys of womanhood in the 1800s in a post-Civil War USA. Another thing that it deals with is the ending. Now, the ending of this book is that Jo has no interest in marriage, and she says this for the last 15 years of her life in the book, but eventually ends up getting married. That makes no sense. For a story about such unique people, it's a disservice to give them all but the same fate, marriage or death, or both. In her real life, Louisa May Alcott never married, and this story is semi-autobiographical. Jo is a sort of extension of Alcott in her own narrative. What Greta Gerwig did with this is that she changed the structure. She took off the third of this story and overlaid it amongst the first 2/3. And that has a great deal of effects, which I'm going to talk about. One of them is that it opens with Jo's writing ambitions. The movie establishes that one of the central themes in this film is ambition, and Jo's ambition specifically. You know, the story is not about growing up, it's about looking back at fonder times. Most of their adaptations, as I said, deal with the first half. But the second bit of this story is where all the major life decisions and difficult choices happen. You know, Amy gives up her dreams of being an artist, marries the man that she knows will love her sister more than he will love her for all of her life. And you know, before I go deeper into this, if any of you are thinking that this is spoiler territory, this book has been out for more than 150 years. Like, you had more than enough time to catch up with the story. The second half of this story also deals with Megan dealing with the issues of marriage and wealth. Beth dies. Jo becomes a breadwinner and has to deal with becoming a female author in a time where women were property in England. Obviously, this story takes place in America. I just wanted to set that up as a contrast. Anyway, to transition, Greta Gerwig finds these genuinely parallel moments in both narratives that allow us to follow seamlessly the events that are happening and that trigger flashbacks from the present. You know, one of these examples is that Jo is disappointed with Amy for not coming back when she does for Beth, which leads to a flashback of Amy and Jo's conflict. The way Greta Gerwig sort of, and, you know, credit to her, direction here. The way she separates the past and the present is very simple. It's with a color palette. The past is made to look in this warm, sort of yellow, orange, red tone. It's almost this sort of artificial rose tint on the memories. But also one of the main sort of differences between past and present, which is very, very easy, simple and easy to discern, is when Beth gets sick, she gets sick once in the past and once in the present. She gets better in the past but dies in the present. And this is shown and contrasted so brilliantly through the same types of shots and angles, but different color palettes, moods, and obviously outcomes as well. But what's the point of it all? It's one that Greta Gerwig isn't showing the story, she's engaging with it. She's showing how things in visuals and thematic explorations were shown in the past and contrasting them with a contemporary point of view. Amy in the book and other iterations is the villain and isn't given as much attention. Gerwig changes that. She establishes Amy's ambitions and how she must deal with the cynicism of adulthood and how she gives up her dreams of both art and Laurie, but obviously ends up with Laurie. In other adaptations, most of them focus on Jo and how impressive her achievements are. This overshadows Amy. What Greta Gerwig does is create the realistic option of settling for marriage as a means to an end in order to create the pragmatic sense of who Amy is. She is a realist who is a character backed into a corner. This is where the marriage is an economic proposition monologue comes through, and honestly one of the best monologues I've heard in a long time. Another way she sort of establishes this is that she introduces us to the characters, which again credit to Gerwig's manipulation of the story, as grown women, which avoids the usual association of Amy with her self-absorbed, vindictive, and frankly annoying younger self. We get more time with the developed, assertive, poised, refined Amy to whom we relate more. And this way the movie becomes a story for women negotiating the best futures for themselves in a world that only gives them sort of two options. It's either marriage or death, or both. Jo and Amy want the same thing. They want to make art, they want to live fulfilling lives, and the difference is how they take their dreams and let them come to fruition. Jo believes that she'll be a famous and rich writer, and she does. But Amy is a realist, and she chooses marriage to be the means to her end. Which is where the ending comes into play. The film indicates that the past timeline that we've been watching, sort of later on, isn't a memory, but in fact, the book that Jo's been writing. It's the indication that the past is sort of what creates our present. And it gives her the material that she needs to write the book that will, in real life, give her the future that she really wants. It's this meta-commentary on what Louisa May Alcott might actually have had to go through in order to get her book published. It's a means to an end. There's two climaxes in this film. There's the real one and the novelized, fictionalized one. There's the negotiation of Jo publishing the novel, and there's the scene where Jo chases Professor Bear in the classic rom-com fashion. Even that, it's such an obvious satirization of, and like commentary on romance that people just, I feel like it just flew over people's head. Or I'm just crazy and noticing things. But notice the color of the scene at the school at the end. When all of them gather. It's the same palette of the past, but it's intercut with the palette of the present, where Jo finally handles the copy of her book that's published and establishes a future for herself, despite not getting the end of the story that she wanted. In the book, that is. It shows Jo to have the ending that Alcott probably wanted, and gives people who want that sort of rom-com Bear Jo ending to have it, if they're oblivious enough to believe that it's real. One of the best moments of this is at the end, where a real copy of Little Women, it's in its first sort of iteration, is shown. It says Little Women by Alcott, but the Alcott sort of disappears and becomes J.L. March. That's the way Greta Gerwig makes this movie go beyond just a story that we all grew up on. Which brings me to my last point. A lot of people look at this book and look at these stories and start thinking about which Little Women they are. I had a chance to think about this. And until recently, all audiences would want to be Jo. I'd want to be Jo because she's like this sort of looked up to artist who will do anything for her craft type of character. But Gerwig's adaptation makes a conscious effort to give all four of these personalities, which are unique and incredible personalities, the time to shine. I think I might be Amy, and that's not based on anything except for the fact that I was just rooting for her the whole film. I feel like I would react like that if I got left out from any situation. But, it goes to see what will happen to my artistic ambitions. Let's see if I take the Jo way out, where I forgo everything for my craft, or the Amy way out, where I just marry rich. We'll see. That'll be interesting. That'll be a fun thing to watch out for. But until then, let's take a break. We'll be back with my hottest take yet. Why I believe Mamma Mia 2 is probably the Godfather 2 of musical rom-com sequels. And followed by that, we'll talk about my top 5 Chris Nolan movies. So stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. We just spoke about Little Women, and we spoke earlier about Dark Waters. Now I'm going to preface this by saying I don't want this segment to challenge the authority that you've given me as your sort of guide to movies with this podcast. I'll be honest, this is a very questionable take. And a lot of people who are studying film with me will highly disagree. But I can't help how I feel. I love Mamma Mia 2. I think it's the greatest musical rom-com, with Meryl Streep making a cameo appearance that uses ABBA songs. And I know that's a very, very, very narrow field, but I also think that it is perhaps one of my favorite feel-good movies of all time. My experience with the Mamma Mias is pretty straightforward. I came across them for the first time because of my mom. When I was young, she took my sister and I to watch this ABBA revival concert. And at that time, I didn't really know much about ABBA. I knew a few songs. I probably knew Dancing Queen because it was just such a popular song. But my mom seemed to know all of them. And as I was listening to them, I kind of grooved with the music. I liked it. I enjoyed it. That ultimately led me to when the first Mamma Mia came out. Now, I can't remember when it was exactly, but I do remember doing everything in my power to go watch it. Which is then what happened with Mamma Mia 2, which came in my infamous summer before senior year high school, 53 movies, 20 movies in the cinema summer. And this, again, is another movie I watched in a cinema with no one else around. Disappointing that no one else came to watch this movie because I had the time of my life, but I'm so glad no one else was in that room because I cried so much. Anyway, one thing I will say is that it helps to be some form of inebriated while watching these movies because it just feels like most of the cast is inebriated while filming these movies, especially the first one. There's no conflicts maintained in the first one. The point of the story is to figure out which one of the three are Sophie's father, but they don't ever come to an answer for that. But it is, in my opinion, the best sequel ever. I don't mean that it's the best film that is also a sequel, because that would be, The Dark Knight or The Godfather 2. What I mean is, this is the best second installment of a franchise with the most increase in quality over its first film. Had it been more than the second installment, then it would be Thor 3. Because Thor 3 is the greatest Marvel movie of all time. But that's a conversation for another time. What I mean is, Mamma Mia 2, Here We Go Again, just got so much better than the first one. Like, so much better in every single way, shape, and form. So for starters, the original movie has absolutely no narrative whatsoever. As I said, Sophie invites all of her dads, decides not to get married, even though she's supposed to get married. Which, her choice. I'm not going to say anything. But she doesn't find out who her dad is and just accepts all three. Again, her choice. But there's just no narrative string there. In the sequel, we get what happens if you take all the elements of the original story and told the real narrative behind those elements. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Mamma Mia 2, Here We Go Again, despite being what it is so good narratively because it used the same structure as the greatest sequel of all time, The Godfather 2. Both movies are about two characters, a parent and a child, following two timelines, one set in the past, one set in the present. I'm laughing while saying this. And the timeline of the parent talks about how they set up the family business, and the timeline in the present with the child talks about how they take over that same family business. In The Godfather 2, this is the Corleone family, the crime family. In Mamma Mia, this is that Greek island hotel farm thing that they have. I'm sorry, it just works. It just works. It goes from pretty much no story in the first film to this narratively engaging film. And honestly, if you had to model a sequel after any sequel, it would have to be The Godfather 2. That's the structure you would go for. Anyway, the original film, which is shot on film, looks worse than the new one, which is shot digitally. Now, usually that would make no sense, and considering we're going to speak about Chris Nolan after this, definitely makes no sense. But this comes at a time where color grading was sort of weird. So the first one was just really oversaturated, and the colors just didn't make any sense. In the sequel, we had a film shot by Wes Anderson's usual director of photography. So it looks like real and, beautiful. It looks like somewhere you'd actually want to go, not like what the original makes the hotel seem to be. One thing I will mention, Pierce Brosnan is in both these films. Now, he's a great actor, don't get me wrong. But the man can't sing. One of the reasons this film, Mamma Mia 2, is so much better than its predecessor is because of this main reason. Mamma Mia 2 is not based off of a stage musical. And it allows the creators to sort of start off scratch. Now, in that way, they don't have to give Pierce Brosnan this meaty singing role that he had in the first one. That man had so much singing time in the first film. It honestly, it was like torture. But the second one, his only solo performance is this sort of 3-liner reduced humming of SOS. And after that, he only sings as part of an ensemble, which is a blessing. Which brings me to the musical numbers of the film. You know, the whole reason of these movies' existence is so people can belt out ABBA songs. Now, songs in musicals, they only happen when words can't really express the emotions of the characters. Which is why 46% of the first movie is musical numbers. That like goes beyond, and it's just unnecessary because you have a scene where you have Sophie's bachelorette party and there's 3 songs with nothing to do with the film, or you have songs that just show up with no justification whatsoever, like when Donna complains about not having money and her friends just start singing Money Money because that's the song that needs to go in the place at the right time. With Mamma Mia 2, you have a movie that functions like a real musical. You have a song for the right place. Sophie and Sky sing about their distance because they can't express it through words, or at least they shouldn't because it's a musical. You have the introduction to young Donna. You have Waterloo becoming a way for Harry, Harry's character to woo Donna. And the best songs in this film are the 2 songs that they borrow from the original film, surprisingly. Mamma Mia begins as this heartbroken ballad about just being destitute, but it goes into this powerful song that symbolizes a rebirth. And Dancing Queen is saved for the emotional climax of the film, where all of the cast members sort of get together. And because Donna sang this in the first movie, it ties the song to her character. It feels like this emotional tribute to Donna. And that dancing scene sequence is so beautiful. I mean, you have the whole cast just sort of dancing and on ships and having fun, and it really does the song justice, so much more than it did with the first one. I mean, the first one, all of the dance numbers just seemed like this sort of tacky, like thrown together sort of weird way because they just weren't shot well. And that's one of the big problems of the films in general. Like Mamma Mia 1, all of the musical numbers seem like they were shot on the day as part of this sort of wedding video package. But in the new one, all of these numbers have a visual storytelling aspect to them. They not only tie into the narrative, but they're reminiscent of old Hollywood musicals. They have a nostalgia to them. And the editing has rhythm. There's long shots, not just a barrage of close-ups like the first one. And there's that climactic christening scene that comes to mind where Meryl Streep makes her cameo finally. Reflections of Donna, past and present, sort of merge with Sophie and everything comes together. This is where I cried. I cried so much in this scene. But there's also the Sophie and Sky duet, One of Us. And the way it's shot, you have their distance but closeness sort of represented by the way it's staged and shot and sort of blocked. Everything seems intentional in the second film, which is a far cry from the first. one of the most important sort of intentionalities of the second film is the humor. You know, the humor in the first film is just overt, explicit sexual innuendo. But the second film has funny jokes, running gags. There's a subtlety to it and a more genuine sort of heartfelt humor. And the performances, I mean, despite losing the greatest actress, Meryl Streep, actually, you know, I don't know if she's that good. She has had some incredible performances, but not in the Mamma Mia franchise. Maybe that's what makes Mamma Mia 2 better? That's something I'm going to have to read up on. Anyway, in 2, Lily James. She makes Mamma Mia as a story feel real. You know, she shows up, she kills it, she's a heartthrob, she's emotional, she has depth, she brings life to Donna. And then Cher just shows up, and we're going to ignore the fact that in the first one they said that Cher's character, Sophie's grandmother, is dead, and then she just shows up. But she shows up and she gives us a backstory to one of the greatest ABBA songs of all time, Fernando. And Andy Garcia is Fernando. Wow. I'm tearing up thinking about that right now. One of the greatest reveals in cinematic history. But what I'm trying to say is, Mamma Mia 2, it goes beyond what its predecessor was. Its predecessor was just a cinematic adaptation of a musical blockbuster with as little change and sort of real adaptation as possible. Mamma Mia 2 has the advantage of a fresh start, a clean slate, that makes it what it is. And that's my hot take for today's episode. That Mamma Mia 2 is the greatest sequel, second installment of a film franchise that overshadows its initial installment. Actually, wait, no, Paddington 2. Oh, no. Okay, while I figure this out, let's take a break. We're going to talk about Chris Nolan next.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. For our final segment today, I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite Christopher Nolan movies in celebration of Inception's 10th anniversary. Me, as most of my male cinephile film student counterparts, are waiting just so impatiently for Nolan's latest Tenet. And I thought that I might, go ahead and watch some of my favorite movies, which happen to be directed by Nolan, and do this segment for you. So Nolan is one of the most well-known voices in film. He redefined superhero movies, and he has these idiosyncrasies that you can recognize almost instantly and make something attribute that this is like you can just say without any questioning that this is a Christopher Nolan movie. If you see any of these following sort of idiosyncrasies, one of them is the subjective point of view. We immerse into Christopher Nolan's films through a point of view, and we watch through the eyes of a character, but also get the same information through that limited perspective. His movies often follow a non-linear story. He likes to disorient his audiences by creating these sort of puzzles that, that especially reward multiple viewings. Multiple viewings are a key in Christopher Nolan's body of work, which is probably why I watch them like almost every other week. He likes to make us detectives. He likes to have ambiguous endings. He also likes moral ambiguity. This concept of good and evil it's too binary for Nolan. It's too binary for reality, which is probably why Nolan likes to insert a little bit of darkness in his heroes and a little bit of light in his villains. And speaking of light, he uses light very often to represent and symbolize character growth and exploration and decay. A lot of his films are reminiscent of film noir. He has these lonely protagonists, themes of betrayal, moody, dark atmospheres. But one of the things that Nolan is best known for is his realism. He prefers film over digital. He's pioneered that sort of push to keep film and filmmaking relevant. He doesn't like CGI. He prefers to do everything practically. And I'll discuss that a little bit in this segment. But a lot of his films are sort of self-referential analogies for the creative process. You can see that in movies like Inception. You can see that in movies like Interstellar. Interstellar is really the story of someone finding the truth, which is essentially what every story is about. He has these common themes of revenge and sacrifice and solitude, memory, obsession, guilt, and often uses frequent collaborations with his wife, Emma Thomas, who's his producer, Jonathan Nolan, his brother, actors like Michael Caine, Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy, and so many more. And most importantly, I think the most important Christopher Nolan frequent collaborator, Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer is a god. But, we can tell from this is that Nolan is one person that is inquiring. He looks deeper in the human condition and trusts in our subconscious and challenges the things we take for granted. He uses this typical big budget action adventure sort of genre and weaponizes it to ask meaningful questions like, is there an objective truth and should we take it as it is? Can we trust our own minds? Are we doing the right thing? Is morality fixed? And that's why so many people love him and so many people resonate with his stories. So I want to start off with no further ado with number 5 for me, and that is Interstellar. Interstellar is this movie about Earth's future, a global crop blight, and Dust Bowl are making the planet uninhabitable. Professor Brand, played by Michael Caine, is this NASA physicist who's working on a way to transport Earth's population to a new home via a wormhole. But in order to get there, they must send a team led by Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, and a team of researchers through the wormhole to figure out which one of the new planets can be accessible as mankind's new home. Now, it's not a perfect movie, right? There's a lot of issues with the script. I remember there's this one line that Anne Hathaway says that ticks me off every single time. I don't know what the line is exactly, but I know that it's there in the middle somewhere. But I just felt drawn into the film. The way it's shot and created, it seemed beyond anything I could conceive at the time when I first watched it. And it builds this emotional connection with Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper and his family and everything that he sacrificed and everything that he has to sort of deal with. There's a song, I think it's called Cornfield Chase. And I think that's the most beautiful piece of music composed in the last 50, 60 years. If you get a chance to listen to it, just listening to it makes me cry. But it plays with questions of existence and, our place in the world. And Anne Hathaway is terrific. Michael Caine is terrific. Jessica Chastain, her performance is heartbreaking. There's this one scene where Matthew McConaughey is just crying into the camera because he was supposed to return for his daughter, to his daughter, and they were supposed to be at the same age, but her birthday comes and she's the age that Matthew McConaughey's character left. And this is Nolan playing with time. And that is one of the best movie cries of all time. That's actually a good list. I'm probably going to do that next week. Top 5 movie cries. I might need more than 5. Number 4, we have Batman Begins. Batman Begins is the first installment of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Follows a young Bruce Wayne played by Christian Bale who travels to the East, very ambiguous East, and is trained by a martial arts instructor played by Liam Neeson as a member of the mysterious League of Shadows. When Liam Neeson's character reveals the League's true purpose, the destruction of Gotham, Wayne returns to Gotham intent on cleaning up the city without destroying his home. And with the help of his friend Alfred, played by Michael Caine, again 2 out of 2 so far, and his loyal butler Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, Batman is born, and the story of how he saves Gotham from annihilation for the first time. Batman Begins is what jump-started Nolan's career. You know, it's got this different look and feel from the other 2 movies. It explores the more dirty corners and nitty-gritty sort of pathways of Gotham. The Narrows are what comes to mind. Christian Bale is and always will be for me the best Batman ever, at least in film. And in this film, his voice isn't as raspy as it is in the next few. It's just a little bit more deep. Another reason this is probably very different from the rest of the 3, and what sort of made it become the sort of beacon for what this franchise evolved into is Maggie Gyllenhaal. Is Katie Holmes. I thought that Katie Holmes is a much better Rachel than Maggie Gyllenhaal was in the second film. But I'm going to be honest, up until I sort of did the research, I thought they were the same person. Another thing that Christopher Nolan does really well is the use of light to represent truth. One scene that comes to mind is when Bruce enters the Batcave with a flashlight to confront his fears. And that light is, again, the representation and symbolic sort of representation of truth. Number 3 is The Prestige. Now, The Prestige is this period thriller set in Edwardian London, I believe, where 2 rival magicians, played by Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, again. I should probably mention that Michael Caine is in this movie as well, 3 out of 3. 2 rival magicians, partners until the tragic death of an assistant during a show, start this feud, this bitter feud, where one of the magicians performs the ultimate magic trick, which is teleportation. His rival tries desperately to uncover the secret of his routine, experimenting with dangerous new science as his quest takes him to the brink of insanity and jeopardizes the lives of everyone around him. This movie gets better with every single rewatch. I implore you, if you haven't seen this recently, watch it again. Watch it with whatever you remember, because there are so many little details and things and hints that Christopher Nolan drops in this film that we miss out on every watch. I feel like you can watch this 20 times and still be not entirely well versed in the details that create the picture. David Bowie has an incredible performance in this film, and Michael Caine as per usual. I think it's criminally underrated. I watched this for the first time on TV because I didn't even know that this was a Chris Nolan movie. I didn't know it was a Chris Nolan movie until I looked it up after, but it's just such an engaging experience that it's probably one of the greatest movies of the century. Next up is The Dark Knight at number 2. With the help of allies Lieutenant Jim Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, and D.A. Harvey Dent, played by Aaron Eckhart, Batman, Christian Bale again, Michael Caine, 4 out of 4, has been able to keep a tight lid on Gotham City. But when a vile young criminal calling himself the Joker, played by Heath Ledger in the greatest actualized villain in any comic book movie ever suddenly throws the town into chaos. And Batman sort of begins to tread this line between heroism and vigilantism in that typical Nolan moral ambiguity sort of exploration. Now, perhaps this is the greatest film that is a sequel, not named The Godfather 2, or Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, or Paddington 2. It changed how comic book movies were perceived forever, and it transcended its own medium. As I said, Heath Ledger's Joker is one of the most memorable character portrayals in history. Every scene he was in, he owned, and he created a cultural shift all by himself that overshadowed even the most extraordinary performances in the film itself. Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face is such a great performance, and often we don't even hear anything about it because of Heath Ledger. R.I.P. But also, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, Morgan Freeman, not Maggie Gyllenhaal. I did not enjoy her performance. But this movie left us with so many pieces of wisdom and quotable lines. Off the top of my head, there's you either die a hero or live long enough to watch yourself become the villain. There's the Joker's why so serious. I don't want to imitate him because I don't want to torture you through the ears. But there's also some men just want to watch the world burn. The hero Gotham deserves, but not the one it needs. Such incredible lines and such a beautiful sort of exploration of the nuanced approach and justifying the means through the ends. Finally, and before I go into my number one, which I assume a lot of you might already have an idea what it is, but here are some honorable mentions. Memento is a great film. It's a film school classic. It was even turned into in a Hindi movie called Gajani, and a South Indian version of it, which the Hindi movie was based off. But when a movie like this makes it across the oceans, it's got some sort of significance. Another movie is Insomnia, starring Al Pacino, which is probably his greatest sort of exploration of the limited character perspectives that he's so well known for. Dunkirk, as I've spoken about, Dunkirk is it's an ode to visual storytelling. That's all I can describe it as. And The Dark Knight Rises. It's number one. My number one Chris Nolan movie is Inception. Yep, 10 years of Inception, it still holds up. It follows the story of Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio in one of his best performances. He's a thief with the rare ability to enter people's dreams and steal their secrets from their dreams. And his skill has made him this hot commodity in the world of corporate espionage, but it also has cost him everything he loves. Cobb gets this chance at redemption when he's offered the impossible task of inception, which is to plant an idea in someone's mind rather than steal it. If he succeeds, it'll be the perfect crime, but there's a dangerous enemy that anticipates Cobb's every move. Now, this movie has me in awe every time I watch it. One of the things that makes it so beautiful is the practical effects. The rotating hall scene comes into mind. And the effort that made it work, that scene is shot practically with an actual rotating hall, with little to no computer-generated effects. The coordination to make that work, something not many directors can do. And DiCaprio's performance, like I said, he plays this balance between being rooted, like having someone root for and be wary of a character in such a beautiful and vulnerable way. Tom Hardy and Joseph Gordon-Levitt have this beautiful banter throughout the whole film, and Ellen Page is our classic Christopher Nolan point of view, our way into the dream world of the film. As well as Marion Cotillard. Is that how you pronounce her name? Marion Cotillard. But she's terrifying. She's haunting. It's honestly, it's scary. She makes the movie go into horror territory for a bit. And again, Hans Zimmer. What a time by Hans Zimmer for this film. Again, another one of the most beautiful pieces of music composed in the last 50 or so years. But what makes this movie so great is the fact that it takes a gimmick of entering dream worlds, but it holds it together with an emotional arc. Cobb's emotional arc. That's what elevates this movie from being just another drab sci-fi fantasy into this hauntingly beautiful story and exploration of a man's struggle with the sacrifices he's made in order for his own gain. Christopher Nolan is someone that I look up to quite a lot because not only is he one of the most authentic voices in cinema, but he also has a way of exploring a lot of the things that I'm interested in through these fantastic creative worlds. And he never does the same thing twice, but always does the same thing twice. He has his recurring idiosyncrasies, but he has a new way of exploring them with every movie he does, and that's why I'm so excited for Tenet. Anyway, thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. You can find us on Twitter at GSMC_movies or on Facebook at GSMC Movie Podcast. Thank you for listening. This has been Shubh Nanda, and well, I haven't really figured out a new line, so stay classy, San Diego.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.